Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Fake Christianity is America's new religion. Fake Christianity. To be more precise, moralistic therapeutic deism, which is my version of that is sentimental barbarism, which I have mentioned often. Moralistic therapeutic deism. We're here to be good people, to try to do good. Everything's supposed to be geared to making me feel good about myself, make me happy. God created the world, but he doesn't have any direct involvement with it. There's a distant God who just wants everybody to be nice to each other, get along, and find their happiness, which is why you live your truth. You become a Christian like President Obama was a Christian. What is sin? Sin is something that goes against my values. Remember that famous statement?
That's right.
I am the repository of truth, so anything I do that goes against my stated values, that's what sin is. There's no absolute truth that exists outside of me. And there's no responsibilities, and there should be no suffering or consequences. It's fun. Sentimental barbarism. Feels good. I mean, it's, a half a step from nihilism as far as I'm concerned. And it takes us as individuals and as a country to some pretty dark places in terms of the sort of barbarism we're willing to tolerate. We see it with respect to the violence on the streets of Chicago, for example. We also see it geopolitically with respect to the sort of persecution of people that we're willing to turn a blind eye towards in exchange for economic benefit. Think about, for example, the NBA's posture towards communist China against the backdrop of Uyghur concentration camps and the persecution of Christians and the imprisonment of freedom fighters like Jimmy Lai, who we've talked about on this show, whose newspaper Apple Daily just got shut down. A sort of in the founding father tradition of our country, somebody who amassed a fortune, Jimmy Lai, to become a freedom fighter and put it all on the line in furtherance of people's liberty against a repressive regime. And what do we say about it? Not a ton. Not a ton. For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Reverend Robert Sirico. He is the president and co-founder of the Acton Institute. And one of my, again, I always mention this Acton Institute. Connecting good intentions to sound economics, one of the great taglines of think tanks in America. Father Sirico, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So what about this, and this is from some survey, Everett Piper, former president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, wrote about this survey, this moralistic therapeutic deism, this fake Christianity, as he terms it, that is now the country's religion and the implications.
Well, as you were discussing that, I was remembering a quote from H. Richard Niebuhr, who was no arch conservative, but he made a remark about liberal theology, and this is like in the 1940s. He said, a God without wrath, this describes their doctrine, a God without wrath brought men without sin into a kingdom without judgment through the ministrations of a Christ without a cross. They've just drained the whole thing of its essential meaning and substituted sociology or therapy or any kind of other abstract notion for the cross of Christ.
And I mean, the reason I selected China as sort of a manifestation of where this belief system can lead you, what it can lead you to tolerate. I selected China because I know this is something that you have been particularly focused on, the freedom of Hong Kongers and the end to the persecution of Christians and Muslims alike.
Yeah, I like that term Hong Konger, by the way. I hope you use it a lot. I hope other people will use it a lot because it makes the distinction between what's going on the mainland and the freedom that the people of Hong Kong, anybody who's ever been to Hong Kong, it's like New York's Chinatown writ large, but now it is becoming a Stalinist camp. People are afraid to give interviews. They're afraid to speak their mind. They can't protest. And this, what was supposed to be one country, two systems, is now becoming just one totalitarian system. And I don't think that this may be the thing that trips the lever. It may rekindle the spirit of Tiananmen Square, where there were demonstrations all over China for freedom, and it links to other things too, because it's not just China, because this isn't a Chinese disease. This is a totalitarian disease. This links to Cuba. This links to Venezuela and North Korea. And if we can inspire an international movement of people who say, look, we're human beings. We have the right to our lives, our property, our associations. This can be a great thing for the world. Could you imagine a free China with all of these entrepreneurial people working with an enormous amount of intelligence and resources at their disposal to create a free world, a prosperous world? It would be wonderful.
Well, do you think as a way to, give or not pay back for China is to pull out of the Beijing 2022 Olympics?
I think there are a whole bunch of prudential decisions that can be made. I'm not a policy wonk, but I think we need to send constant messages to China that this is not tolerable. But what we need to do, I think the pulling out of the Olympics might be one thing, or these restrictions on specific areas of trade might be another thing. But what we need is a vast momentum, both outside of China, but also in mainland China, that points to how unjust and how intolerable this kind of a system is. This is what happened, remember, not so long ago. Some of us still remember the fall of the Berlin Wall. This is what needs to happen in Asia.
But that, it's difficult to see how that happens from the outside, but certainly outside actors can help to focus people's attention, to perhaps facilitate inside revolutionaries in the direction of freedom, of course. But, it requires sort of a moral framework from which one operates. It requires willingness to make statements of conscience. And I just don't know that you're going to get many statements of conscience from the political elites or the C-suites in this country.
You really, in this country, yeah. We have our own set of very, very serious problems along the same lines. But let's remember, we don't initially need a great plethora of moral statements, especially from elites. We only need moral statements from courageous people, a Solzhenitsyn, a Mandela, a Jimmy Lai. The potency of their witness, because what is it they're touching in? They're tapping a knowledge that every single human being has in their heart, that they possess an inherent dignity and a right to their own freedom. They're made in the image and likeness of God, and we may express it in different traditional languages, but that's the reality, and that's what needs to be pointed to. We just need to not let the witness of a Jimmy Lai go forgotten.
Well, yeah. So how do you aid and abet those who are willing to provide that kind of courage, that kind of witness, as you say? Because Tank Man, everybody remembers Tank Man in Tiananmen Square, even though we don't know who he was, which is sort of part of the power of it. But then how do you aid and abet that? So Tank Man provided that example in Tiananmen Square, and yet in 2021, here we are with respect to a communist China that's even more repressive than it was 40 years ago.
Solzhenitsyn didn't just write Cancer Ward or the Gulag Archipelago, and the next day the Berlin Wall fell. There's going to be a great cost. This is why it's so heroic. There's a great cost being paid by a man right now in a Chinese Hong Kong prison who could have left Hong Kong at any time and lived in any number of his homes worldwide. Remember, this is a billionaire. Mm-hmm. This is a man who came to Shanghai penniless and over the course of a career built an empire of both clothing, textiles, and media, and chose to stay in this place to testify to freedom. I think what we need to do is amplify the story. And you're doing that right now in this interview, in this conversation. And everyone in their own respective field of influence, whether they're preachers in their homilies or teachers in their classes or just around the coffee cooler to tell the story. This is the way we build this awareness. And at some point, there's a tipping point where a new Tiananmen Square takes place.
You have the Acton Institute, which you're the president of, co-founder of, also has schools. Speaking of that, and
Yes.
and so this is part of the education. I'm sure. I wonder how you react to the fight that's going on across the nation over critical race theory as part of the curriculum, and I think about this in a biblical context too. Just reading a manuscript of a new book from a friend of mine who's a DePaul philosophy professor, and on the and it's entitled "What White Americans Owe Black Americans," and the scripture passage on the first page is from Ezekiel 18:20. The son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the father, nor the father suffer for the iniquity of the son. His point being to sort of lead into a conversation on reparations and the sins of the past being sort of worked out in the present, and your reaction to that against the backdrop of the fight over K through 12 curriculum.
Well, let me say that critical race theory, in many ways, very much like Black Lives Matter, have tapped into a truth. You know, G.K. Chesterton said that heresy is truth gone mad. You know, it's a feature of the truth, like the deity of Jesus Christ or the humanity of Christ. And you just say, well, he is only man, he's not God. Heresy is truth gone mad. And the truth that these movements, the racial movements, have tapped into is the great injustice at the founding of the United States, that people could own slaves, that they were defended. And this was a great debate at the founding. You know, it wasn't just like let's go along with this. So I think we have to begin with that. We have to acknowledge that. We have to, in effect, take this out of the hand of Marxists. And we need to be the proponents. It was the Republican Party who fought against slavery. It wasn't the progressives. They were the real racists in their day. So I think that's the first step, that we need to make very clear that we're opposed to this collectivist mentality that judges people simply by their collective race. And then we need to say, now there is reparation owed to people, but it is not a kind of collective thing where it's a step in effect towards socialism. This is not the solution to the ills of the past. So I don't want to say that there's nothing that white Americans owe blacks. We certainly owe them the respect and the dignity and need to fight the tendencies, the cultural tendencies that have grown up in 300 years in this country, and own the issue ourselves. And that, I think, will dilute and displace this kind of Marxist-inspired racial hatred that's being projected into our schools.
He is Father Robert Sirico, president and co-founder of the Acton Institute, also the author of a number of books, including Defending the Free Market, The Moral Case for a Free Economy. Father Sirico, thanks for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's.